What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and today we're going to be testing the Sabine Killer Iden deck that was proposed by Death Weasel. This is a deck that it's an Iden Versio deck that was designed to try and beat the Sabine aggro builds. And so we have DestinyRiku playing a Sabine aggro build that I had earlier, and I am playing the Sabine Killer Iden here, and we're going to see how it goes. So my opponent leads off with Sabine Ran Explosives Artist. I'm going to play a Seasoned Short Trooper. Now, I do feel like I'm behind with this start, but the upside of this is in a Sabine aggro deck, you're usually not trying to attack your opponent's units. You're usually just trying to push that damage through. So even if my opponent uses Sabine Ran Explosives Artist to attack and defeat my Seasoned Short Trooper, it will end up being a situation where the Short Trooper has saved 3 damage from my base. This deck, I want to say that the Sabine Killer Iden deck, it doesn't have it isn't the exact build that I would be running, but so as an example, I think I would probably be playing the Energy Conversion Lab because I think the value of that ambush is often going to be more than the 5 health that you save. And I think there's also some more expensive cards in this build that I wouldn't run, at least in main deck, if my main goal was to fight Sabine. But we're gonna see how it does. We're gonna see how it does anyway. And at this point, I do have a 30 HP base to my opponent's 25. I don't have a base ability, but the Jeddah City action is unlikely to be super impactful here. I don't know. We'll have to see. I think that in general, so DestinyRiku is using, I believe, actually an older version of one of my own Sabine builds. I think the most recent version I've actually swapped off of Jeddah City and am running the Administrator's Tower for the extra life in aggro matchups. However, in this matchup, where the Sabine deck is playing against a more control-oriented build, I think that if you're playing against control, it actually is more desirable to have Jeddah City, because that ability might allow you to keep one of your units on the field for longer or allow you to get through a sentinel without taking a bunch of damage. Like if your opponent plays a copy of Chewbacca or Obi-Wan, something like that, you can use the Jeddah City on it, reduce its damage, and push through with your units. So in this situation, my opponent plays a Fleet Lieutenant and swings in with Sabine for 5 damage. So kind of a classic play here. Already chipping away at my life pool. I am going to play. I'm going to play Del Miko here. So Del Miko is a 3-cost 3/3 with Restore 1, and he additionally makes it so that it is more events that your opponent plays cost 1 more. My opponent ends up taking the initiative here, or actually was thinking of taking the initiative, but then decides to use Sabine's ability instead, which allows me to take the initiative. And I find you know Sabine's ability here is quite good, but I think that it's hard to say. It may actually have been better to take the initiative. So if my opponent had taken the initiative, he could have attacked with Sabine Ran Explosives Artist um, before Del Miko attacked and defeated her. And so in this situation where Del attacks, uh, so if he had attacked with Sabine Explosives Artist, I likely attack with Del anyway, but into the Fleet Lieutenant. However, that situation is more favorable for my opponent because it's a trade instead of Del remaining alive with 1 HP. So I think it would have been more desirable to take the initiative rather than using Sabine's ability, and you make the attack with Sabine Explosives Artist in order to get in a more favorable situation for the unit combat. I don't know for sure. That's just sort of the way that that's sort of the way that I would tend to think it. So my opponent swings on in with the Fleet Lieutenant. I'm trying to stall here. I'm trying to get in a good opportunity to play this takedown. I use Iden's ability to heal my base for 1 because I've defeated an enemy unit this phase. My opponent plays out the Millennium Falcon. So at this point I could actually play the takedown. So at this point I could actually play the takedown on the Falcon immediately. There's an argument that I should do that. I'm currently saving it for Leader Sabine. Um, but if I were to play the takedown on the Falcon, I could then gain some tempo, and go into the next turn going first. Looking back on it, I actually think that would have been the stronger play. So if I do, what I end up doing though is kind of slow rolling this to counter Sabine. So my opponent swings in with the Falcon for 3. I actually pass here. My opponent uses Sabine's ability for 1 and 1. I then deploy Sabine. I play the takedown on Sabine. So that's I think also we may have forgotten to do the 1 damage to Destiny's base here. Yeah, maybe a bit of an error. But the I think it probably would have been more desirable for me to use the takedown on the Falcon in this situation. Hard to say for sure. Hard to say for sure. Um, but if I had used the takedown on the Falcon, my opponent deploys Sabine. I can then attack Sabine with the Shore Trooper. Sabine probably attacks me in some respect, and then I can use the I Del can attack and defeat Sabine next turn, or attack and defeat something else. Like the damage already on Sabine makes it so that he can't just use Sabine to defeat Del while also dealing 1 damage to my base. Or he could, but it would involve losing Sabine. I do think taking on the Falcon would be better. One upside of not killing the Falcon though is that my opponent has to pay 1 to keep the Falcon in play. So now I could have Del attack and defeat that trooper. I could play an overwhelming barrage, but it wouldn't really do that much damage, so I could do it for 5 with Del. I could defeat the Falcon with that and deal 1 damage to the trooper, and then use the other trooper to defeat the lieutenant, which might actually be reasonable. But I've thought that it might be better here to save the barrage for a time when I can have a higher immediate impact. Del takes out the Fleet Lieutenant, healing my base. My opponent attacks with the Falcon. I'm healing with Iden. We see a um, we see an A-wing hit the field. I play a tie advanced and buff my shore trooper. This also means that next turn the shore trooper is going to get a plus. He's going to get his +2 power for me having 6 or more, and I'll be able to do a bigger barrage. However, my opponent hits me with a bamboozle. So bamboozle exhausts the trooper, preventing me from attacking the base, and it returns all upgrades on it to the owner's hand. Experience and shields go away when that happens. They can't be returned to hand, and they just get discarded. So that's actually quite a good counter to the buff from my tie advanced. On the other hand, I'm feeling like I'm starting to stabilize here. I have the tie advanced to take down the A-wing. The 3-2 stat line actually works really well against those A-wings if you can attack into them. Um, my opponent brings out tries to bring out a wing leader here, but it isn't. Oh, I let my opponent use Sabine's ability last turn after forgetting. My opponent tries to bring out a wing leader here, but I point out that it's not going to buff the Falcon, so it's probably not worth it. If it were the only card, maybe ends up bringing out red 3 instead, which does buff the Falcon. So at this point, again, I could go for this overwhelming barrage. I could defeat red 3 and damage the Falcon, but it's just really low value again. Um, I deploy Iden. This does mean that I lose out on the value. I probably should have used Iden's ability first before deploying her to heal one from the defeated A-wing. My Shore Trooper swings in for 4. My opponent was thinking about using Jeddah City, but because I attacked with the Shore Trooper first instead of Iden, Jeddah City can't be used because it can't target leaders. So in this situation, uh, one thing I could do is barrage. Another thing that I could do is go for the combo here with the Viper probe droid into the regional governor. So my opponent takes the initiative. I'm going to play the Viper probe droid. I get to see my opponent's hand. It's going to be red 3 and wing leader. So my opponent has another copy of red 3 and has a wing leader. So this is actually a potential opportunity for me because I have an Imperial Governor. So if I prevent my opponent from playing red 3 using the Imperial Governor, my opponent will likely play the wing leader. And at that point, um, we could see the wing leader buffing the existing red 3, and then I can do an overwhelming barrage for 6 with Iden and take down both the buffed wing leader and or both the buffed red 3 and the wing leader. And my opponent will be left with the existing red 3 as a card that's unable to be played. Now, I think it's possible, of course, that my opponent will just resource it, given the situation with the governor, and it's at least conceivable that I should name like Surprise Strike or something instead. But I like the information gain from the Viper Probe Droid. So my opponent indeed goes Wing Leader buffing Red 3. So this actually would be lethal this turn in the Space Arena, I believe, since the Falcon could hit me for 4 and Red 3 could hit me for 5. Luckily for me, though, I have the answer waiting right here with the Overwhelming Barrage taking out both those units. And because Iden is on the board, this is also going to heal me for 2. So Aiden's ability becomes really good. So then the Falcon attacks the base for 3. I use a Snowtrooper Lieutenant to attack into the Falcon and defeat it. That's another point of healing here. My opponent uses Jeddah City on my Snowtrooper to mitigate the incoming damage. I swing in for 3. My opponent plays a Spark of Rebellion and discards the one card that I have in hand, which is an Entrenched. I don't really like losing that. It would be good if my opponent played another Falcon or something, but actually at this point I am basically at lethal with the attacks from my units. Jeddah City saves my opponent for another turn, but there's nothing they can play that's going to close this one out. So we do actually end up getting the win here. Um, and yeah, that's going to be a concession. So the Sabine Killer Iden deck succeeding against Sabine in the first game, managed to stabilize. Interesting situation. I think that the honestly, I was a little worried. I wasn't sure this deck was going to work. I thought that it was going to. I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be tough. There's some choices in the deck that I would not necessarily make. Like these larger units. So we have the Count Dooku and the Gladiator Star Destroyer in hand right now. I don't think you want these against Sabine. But it's possible they should still be in the deck in order to help with other matchups. So my opponent brings out a Green Squadron A-Wing, 2-cost 1/3 with Raid 2. Great starting unit for Sabine. I'm going to go with the Viper Probe Droid this time. I get to see my opponent's hand. And I see 2 Surprise Strikes, which is not what you want to see when you're facing Sabine, and a Fleet Lieutenant. So next turn is almost certainly going to be Fleet Lieutenant with the A-Wing into the base for 5. And then the Surprise Strikes will have some bonus damage later on. Okay, so I've played the Viper. Um, my opponent considers using Sabine's ability, but decides to take the initiative instead, in order to try and get the, I think in order to try to attack first with the A-Wing without any disruption. I think against this deck, I think it's better to just lose the initiative because I don't really have any 3-cost heavy disruption. So I guess I could play an entrenched on the A-Wing. So that would actually stop an attack, but there's no open fire in this build. And because because it is running the Death Star Command Center instead of the Energy Conversion Lab, there's no opportunity for me to use something like Consortium Star Viper with an ambush to take out the A-Wing, which would otherwise be a good play. So my opponent plays the Fleet Lieutenant, swings in for 5. I use my Probe Droid to defeat the Fleet Lieutenant. I heal 1. My opponent does 1 damage to each base. I play Del Miko. I'm actually really happy to see Del here because the 1 extra cost for my opponent's events is going to be really useful in making those surprise strikes more difficult to play. And Del also has Restore 1. He's honestly just a really good card. Now, 3-cost 3/3 is below the curve, so you do suffer from having bad base stats, but the abilities are highly relevant. In this situation, I play a tie advanced and buff the so my opponent swings in with the A-Wing. I play a tie advanced and buff Del. This tie advanced is also in a good position to deal with the A-Wing. If my opponent doesn't attack into me, I can do a lot. My opponent plays K2. I'm gonna have Del attack and defeat K2. My opponent then rethinks this line of play. and decides it might be more beneficial to jet a city first. So it uses jet a city on Dell. So now Dell only has one attack, so can't attack and defeat K2. So instead, I attack the enemy base, dealing 1 damage and healing my base for 1. My opponent then plays K2. I take the initiative. Sabine's ability used here before she deploys, 1 damage to each base. Then Sabine deploys and swings into the base for another 3. Honestly, I don't feel like I'm in that bad a situation. This buffed Del Miko is going to be a problem for my opponent to deal with in the ground arena. My Tai Advanced can deal with his A-Wing in the space arena. Doesn't feel bad to me. I do have a bit of a clunky hand. I have a lot of 3 costs. It would be better if I had like another 2 cost to play along with one of these 3 costs, but I can also just play Takedown this turn if needed. End up resourcing a Cell Block Guard. I'm not a huge fan of that card. So on this turn, I have a question like what attack to make first. So Del can defeat either of my opponent's units in the ground arena, and the Interceptor can defeat the A-Wing in the space arena. Um, I think what I end up doing is having the Interceptor attack and defeat the A-Wing, and the reason that I do it this way is my opponent can attack with either of Sabine or K2, and then Del can attack the other one. So if I don't attack with Del first, I still get the opportunity to stop one of his units in the ground arena in principle. But by making my attack in the space arena first, I ensure that I can prevent that damage without my opponent getting the chance to attack there. However, my opponent plays Leia Organa Defiant Princess, exhausting Del, so I'm not going to be able to deal with one of those units. On the plus side, though, I do have this copy of Takedown in hand, which I'm going to be able to use to clear somebody. So I think I played Takedown on Sabine here. It probably would have been better to play it on K2. So I think that was actually a bit of a blunder on my part. If I play it on K2, it's less. Okay, so my opponent buffs K2 and then uses K2 to attack and defeat Del. I take 1 overflow damage or 1 overwhelm damage. And K2 is still alive on 1 HP, which is not great for me. Um, but luckily, I have a good counter here with this Imperial Death Trooper that I have in hand. So I can play the Death Trooper's a 3-cost 3/3, and when played, you may deal two damage to this unit. I think you actually have to. I don't think it's you may, but it's you deal 2 damage to this unit and 2 damage to another ground unit. So what I can do here is I can play the Death Trooper, have it damage itself, and then also have it take do two damage to K2, defeating him. My own base will take 3 damage from K2's ability, but it allows me to prevent getting hit for 6. And I do think that it would have been probably advantageous for my opponent to. I think it would have probably been advantageous for my opponent to attack the base instead of attacking Del with K2. Um, may have been trying to free up the resources for events, and it does stop the healing, but I think you just want to push damage to base. I could be wrong. We discussed this a bit after the fact. Um, not entirely sure. However, I've now removed that. We now see one of those surprise strikes from earlier being used. So the wing leader gets in for 5 damage to base. I'm then gonna play another Imperial Death Trooper and defeat Leia. Or no, I play the I play the Cell Block Guard here. 3-cost 3/3. My opponent trades Leia for the Cell Block Guard using a Fleet Lieutenant. I can still use Iden's ability here, and I also can use my Tai Advanced to clear off the opposing. I can use my Tai Advanced to clear off the opposing wing leader. I also get to deploy Iden this turn, so Iden hitting the field 4/4 with shielded, so she comes into play with a shield. I'm going to use her to take down the Fleet Lieutenant, healing 1. Then I take this trade, healing another 1. And so now the board is clear. I have some units in the ground. I've taken a fair chunk of damage, but Iden's healing is now in place to try and stabilize me. I'm actually feeling pretty good about this one too. We'll have to see exactly how it goes. So my opponent brings out Leia Organa, Defiant Princess, exhausting Iden Versio. I counter with Agent Callus, attacking and defeating Leia, and healing 1 with Iden's passive. I also draw a card since Leia is unique. My opponent plays the Falcon. I don't have an immediate answer for the Falcon, but I can barrage it next turn. I play General Tag, who gives a +1/+1 counter to up to 3 troopers. Luckily for me, I actually have 3 troopers in play. Callus and Iden are both troopers. My opponent then attacks with the Falcon for 3 damage here. And I am, I do have to deal with that Falcon somehow, but I have some cards in hand that can handle it. And I could attack with this Death Trooper, but after my opponent uses Sabine's ability, I'm actually just going to take the initiative. This is also a situation where having the 30 HP base is giving me some extra comfort. Even if my opponent had a surprise strike to hit for 6, I would still be on the field. I could defeat the Falcon, and actually my opponent concedes at this point. So another victory for the Sabine Killer Iden. We're 2-0, and we are going to play the third game anyway to see how it goes. But yeah, Aiden's healing has been very helpful in this matchup, and I think this mix of units has been useful as well. I do think the space arena is weaker than the ground arena. I think that if I were making some changes to this build, I think what I would do is I think that I would run the energy conversion lab instead of the 30 HP base, even though 30 HP can be helpful. And I think I would bring in, at least as a sideboard card, the Consortium Star Viper as an extra counter unit for their space presence. Okay. So I mulligan a weak hand. This hand, I'm probably going to lead off with the regional governor. I'm going to have to just do a blind regional governor here, but could be worse. My opponent plays out an A-wing. I do regional governor, and I believe I name wing leader, which is one of the biggest threat cards early in the game. If the opponent does turn 1 unit, turn 2 wing leader, that can be a huge problem. It can really snowball. So luckily for me, I also see a copy of Snowtrooper Lieutenant, which is going to really help me here. So my opponent hits me for 5 with the Fleet Lieutenant Wing Leader, or with the Fleet Lieutenant A-Wing. I use my Snowtrooper Lieutenant to have the Governor take out the Fleet Lieutenant. My opponent uses Aiden's ability, or Sabine's ability. I use Aiden's ability, and my opponent takes the initiative. It's conceivable. I don't think it's conceivable that it would have been to my advantage in that scenario to actually take the initiative here so that I can entrench my opponent's A-wing before it attacks. But my current plan is to try and get a big unit and then like get somebody buffed up, and then use the overwhelming barrage instead. So I'm saving the entrenched, and I intend to use it on my own side here. So my opponent swings in for 3. So this isn't an awesome hand. I have this entrenched though. I'm currently thinking I'm going to entrench so I first attack with the governor. My opponent brings out another A-wing. I'm going to use the entrenched on my own, I'm going to use entrenched on my own snowtrooper here. So it's now a 5/5. That puts it in a position to attack and defeat Sabine. My opponent deploys a Lothal Insurgent, though, so this is going to cause me to draw a card and then discard one at random. So I draw a Del. What I'm really hoping here is that I don't lose this Overwhelming Barrage. The Overwhelming Barrage that I have in hand is like my main answer to this space threat right now. And if I lose that to this random discard, I could be in trouble. I end up losing Del, so it's basically the same hand that I had before. That's a 3/2. So Sabine Leader also swings for 3, and additionally, having Sabine Leader on board actually limits the amount of damage the Sabine deck can put out because her ability is no longer relevant. So I would rather defeat a 3-power unit than defeat Sabine. Sabine uses her ability. I use Aiden's ability. Sabine deploys. So in this situation, my opponent could actually attack and defeat my Snowtrooper. Um, so what I do here is I play General Tag, giving an experience to the Snowtrooper. So he's now out of range of Sabine's attack because he is now to a 6/6. My opponent Jeddah cities him and attacks with Sabine. I think not realizing that Leader Sabine's ability doesn't work on units the the unit Sabine's ability does. And then I point out that this is not really very good because the Snowtrooper remains in play. And I think my opponent then changes the plan to attack the base instead. But I'm actually feeling really good about this situation. So General Tag actually sort of saved my Snowtrooper from being picked off by Jeddah City plus Sabine here. and now I'm actually poised. I'm poised to really take control of the game. I can do an overwhelming barrage on that trooper, destroy both the A-wings, damage Sabine, and really be in a pretty good spot, I think. We'll have to see exactly what happens. It's possible my opponent could deploy more space units, which would be a threat for me. I do feel like this is a little weak in the space arena, but I actually have another barrage that I just drew, which means I think even if that happens, I'm going to be in a relatively safe spot. Um, and I've taken 12 damage, which is substantial, but I am not about to lose. And so I think this is going to be a good situation. Yeah, there's the barrage. I'm going to wipe the A-wings. So the 6/6 buffed Snow Trooper Lieutenant dealing 8 damage there, defeating both A-wings and damaging Sabine. And actually, my opponent gives up at this point. So yeah, I wasn't sure that the Sabine Killer Iden was going to work out. But we went 3-0 with it. So I think there may be something to this. I don't know about this exact build. I would be running a different build if I were trying to run this style of deck. I think there are a few changes I would make, but I have to say that the deck performed a lot better than I thought it might. Even with having some expensive cards that aren't really good for this matchup, it was still able to halt Sabine's aggression, to stabilize and get the wins. So very interesting result, honestly. And it's made me start thinking more about Green Iden. I had previously been playing Red Iden, but this seems like it could have some legs. We'll have to see. Uh, I think that I will say that I think my opponent has a fair amount of experience playing aggro, but usually with Leia instead of Sabine. So I don't know if these were like the most optimal Sabine plays necessarily. But I think the Sabine deck is pretty good. It's a deck that I've been using myself. It has, yeah. I mean, I think it's a pretty solid deck. And then the Iden build isn't necessarily what I would run, but like, hey, shout out to the creator of this build, Death Weasel 50, who proposed this in the YouTube comments, and I would have played with him directly, but he said he doesn't really use TTS, but has been testing this with printed proxies, I believe. And I think there may be something to it. I don't know if it's the final version of the build. I would personally make some changes if I was trying to make a blue-green Iden, Sabine Killer Iden. But this one, at least in this match, this one worked out. So yeah, shout out to Death Weasel 50, and maybe this will be helpful in taking on some of the Sabines that are quite prevalent right now. I know that this is a very aggro meta, so yeah. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks to you all for watching. We'll be back with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. In the video description below, you can find the deck list both for Death Weasel 50's Sabine Killer Iden, and also for the updated version of the Sabine deck that my opponent DestinyRiku was using. I will link to both of those in the video description below if you guys want to check those decks out. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you all later.